In the sweltering heat of 1850, along the Savannah River in Georgia, a slave named Hezekiah didn't just endure his bondage. He sharpened it into a weapon. On the sprawling, sun-baked acres of the Sterling plantation, where the air hung thick with the smell of molasses and misery, Hezekiah watched his master, Master Sterling, a man whose cruelty was as constant as the Georgia sun, exert his terrible power. Sterling owned not just land and people, but a prized hunting dog, a beast as vicious and spoiled as its master named Brutus. Hezekiah saw that dog used to track down runaways, to enforce Sterling's rages, to become a symbol of the power that crushed them all. But Hezekiah, a man whose quiet strength hid a burning ember of defiance, saw something else in that dog, something more than just a beast. He saw a tool waiting to be turned. Hezekiah, through a plan whispered in shadows and executed with chilling precision, would eventually force his master to eat the flesh of his own dog before Master Sterling finally died. This is the true story of a black enslaved man who chose not to just survive, but to serve a chilling sentence, who made the earth tremble not with shouts but with silence, in a time when black voices were deemed less than whispers. It's a story of a plan forged in the crucible of suffering, a revenge so profound it would echo through the very soil of Georgia. Before we continue with the video, tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it right now on your clock? And don't forget to hit the like button. The morning at Sterling Plantation broke not with the gentle chirping of birds welcoming a new day, but with the harsh clang of the overseer's bell. It was a sound that echoed the start of another day of unending labor under a sky that promised only heat and exhaustion, a relentless cycle that seemed designed to grind the spirit into dust. The enslaved people rose before the sun, their bare feet padding softly on the packed dirt floors of their cabins, the smell of damp straw and stale sweat clinging to their rough clothes like a second skin. Sleep offered little respite, snatched in brief fitful hours between exhausting work and the constant hum of fear. Hezekiah was already awake, his body stiff from sleeping on a thin pallet that offered no comfort, his mind already racing through the day's tasks, cataloging the dangers and indignities that lay ahead. But even as he prepared his mind for the day, his thoughts kept returning to the previous evening, to the image of Master Sterling laughing, a guttural, unpleasant sound as his dog Brutus, a powerful, snarling brute the color of mud and malice, tore at the arm of a young slave named Samuel, who had accidentally dropped a bucket of water. The Savannah sun beat down relentlessly, turning the fields of cotton and sugarcane into shimmering waves of heat that distorted the landscape, making it appear as if the very earth was dissolving. Master Sterling, a man whose face was as bloated and red as a ripe plum that had begun to spoil, rode his horse through the rows, his whip flicking idly, a nervous habit that meant he was either bored or looking for a target. He was a man who seemed to delight in the suffering of others, finding amusement in the bowed heads and weary movements of the people he owned, treating them not as human beings but as animated tools, disposable and replaceable. Brutus, his prized hunting dog, a hulking beast with a perpetually low growl and eyes that seemed to hold an ancient, predatory gleam, trotted faithfully beside him, its tongue lolling, its muscles rippling with a strength that was only matched by its owner's cruelty. Brutus was more than just a dog. It was an extension of Sterling's malice, a living weapon trained to inflict pain and instill fear, a constant, terrifying reminder of the master's absolute authority. Hezekiah watched them pass, his gaze steady, his face unreadable, a practiced mask that hid the turmoil churning beneath. He saw Sterling lean down, stroking Brutus's thick fur, whispering praises into its floppy ears, words of affection that were never directed at any human soul on the plantation. It was a sickening display of misplaced devotion, a public declaration that the animal was valued more than any of the human lives Sterling controlled. Hezekiah was known for his quiet strength. He wasn't one for loud complaints or open defiance, actions that often led to swift and brutal punishment. Instead, his resistance was a silent, steady burn, a refusal to break even when the pressure was immense. His silence held a weight that even Sterling seemed to sense sometimes, a stillness that unnerved the master more than any shouted accusation. He worked in the stables, tending to Sterling's horses, a job that kept him away from the overseer's direct gaze, but still within earshot of Sterling's casual cruelties. He saw how Sterling treated Brutus, feeding it the best cuts of meat, often from the hunting trips where the dog proved its worth by bringing down game that would later be served at Sterling's table. He saw how Sterling used Brutus, not just for hunting but for punishment, ordering the dog to attack slaves who displeased him, laughing as the beast tore into flesh, relishing the sounds of pain and terror. It was a calculated humiliation, a demonstration that Sterling owned not just bodies and labor, but the very capacity for pain and fear, that he could even turn a creature's primal instincts against those he deemed lesser. Hezekiah remembered Eliza, his wife, her quick smile and the way she hummed softly while she worked. Months ago, Eliza had been carrying a bucket of water, trying to be swift, trying to be invisible. But Sterling had appeared suddenly, blocking her path. Brutus, ever watchful for Sterling's command, had lunged, its teeth sinking into Eliza's leg before Sterling even gave the order. The shriek Eliza had let out, a sound of pure agony and terror, still echoed in Hezekiah's ears. Sterling had merely laughed, pulling the dog back with a casual tug on the leash, then turned to Eliza with a smirk. "Learn to move faster, girl," he'd sneered, gesturing to her mangled leg. "My dog doesn't like to be kept waiting." The limp Eliza now carried was a constant reminder of Sterling's power and Hezekiah's powerlessness, a physical manifestation of the chains that bound them all. That night, after the fields were silent and the big house was dark, save for the lamps burning in Sterling's study, a place of power and secrecy, Hezekiah met with others in the hushed darkness of the slave quarters. The cabins were small and close, offering little privacy, but the night itself felt like a vast, dark blanket that could swallow secrets. There was Martha, the cook, whose hands were gnarled by arthritis and stained by decades of working over hot stoves, but whose eyes held the deep sorrow of a mother whose children had all been sold away, leaving her with only ghosts and memories. There was Elias, a stable hand like Hezekiah, strong and steady, whose quiet demeanor hid a simmering rage that had been building for years. He had seen his own father whipped bloody for daring to look Master Sterling in the eye, a transgression that had cost the old man his life. They spoke in whispers, their voices low and urgent, the sounds swallowed by the vastness of the Georgia night. The rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, all seeming to conspire to hide their hushed conversation. "He grows worse," Elias murmured, referring to Sterling's increasingly unpredictable temper and his reliance on Brutus to enforce his will. "He used the dog on Samuel today just for stumbling with a bucket." "The boy's leg is torn open." Hezekiah felt a cold dread wash over him, imagining Samuel, the child he had promised to protect, suffering that same agony his wife had endured. "That beast is as cruel as he is," Martha sighed, her voice heavy with the weight of years of suffering. "Sterling pets it, feeds it the best, and then sets it on us like it's just another tool of his trade. He loves that dog more than any human soul." Hezekiah listened, his mind working like a well-oiled machine, piecing together fragments of observation and knowledge. He had been observing Brutus for weeks, noting its habits, its feeding times, its almost unnatural attachment to Sterling, its vulnerability when Sterling was not around. He saw how Sterling lavished attention on the dog, giving it the choicest cuts of meat, the softest bedding, the praise that was denied to his human charges. He knew Sterling's arrogance was his greatest weakness, his belief in his own invincibility a blind spot that could be exploited. A dangerous idea began to form in his mind, a plan so audacious, so horrifying, that it felt like a betrayal of his own humanity, a descent into the very darkness he fought against. But it was also the only thing he could think of that might truly make Sterling understand the depth of the suffering he inflicted, that might make him feel even a fraction of the pain he so carelessly dealt out. "The dog is strong," Hezekiah said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, cutting through the oppressive silence. "But it eats what Sterling gives it. And Sterling trusts it. He trusts it more than he trusts any of us." Martha looked at him, her eyes sharp in the dim light, seeing the resolve hardening in his gaze. "What are you saying, Hezekiah?" Her voice was a low rasp, tinged with fear. Hezekiah met her gaze, his own eyes steady and burning with a cold fire. "I'm saying," he replied, the words carefully chosen, each one deliberate, "that if Sterling trusts his dog to obey him, perhaps his dog will obey him even in death. And if Sterling feeds his dog the best, perhaps he will appreciate the finest cut, even if he doesn't know where it came from." The implications hung heavy in the air, a chilling silence falling over the small gathering, a silence broken only by the distant cry of a night bird. Josephine, the youngest of them, barely 15, trembled beside Martha, her small frame shaking. "He'll kill us if he finds out," she whispered, her voice thin and reedy like a trapped bird's song. "He'll kill us all. He'll have Brutus tear us apart." Hezekiah shook his head, the plan solidifying in his mind, taking on a terrifying clarity. "Brutus will be gone," he said, his voice low and firm. "And Sterling will mourn his loss, but his grief will be turned into something else, something he will never forget. He will learn what it means to feed his monster, to cherish what he loves, only to have it turned against him." Elias nodded slowly, his face grim. "It is a terrible plan, Hezekiah. A sin. Is it more sinful than what he does to us every day?" Hezekiah countered, his voice gaining a low intensity. "Is it more sinful than watching our families torn apart, our bodies broken, our spirits crushed?" "We will fight him with the only weapons we have left, our minds, our silence, and our willingness to become terrible ourselves if it means freedom." The seed of vengeance had been planted, watered by years of suffering, and it was ready to grow into something that would shake the very foundations of Sterling Plantation. The plan, once conceived in the desperate darkness of the slave quarters, began to take root, growing with a terrifying momentum. Hezekiah, a man not prone to outward displays of emotion, became a creature of quiet observation and meticulous preparation. His days in the stables, once a routine of service, transformed into a reconnaissance mission. He watched Brutus with an unsettling focus, noting the dog's feeding schedule, the times Sterling would unleash it for a hunt or for punishment, the seemingly unshakable bond between master and beast. He learned that Brutus, despite its ferocity toward slaves, was utterly devoted to Sterling, responding to his every command, feeding off his master's praise and affection. This devotion, Hezekiah realized, was not a sign of loyalty, but of conditioning, a deep-seated instinct that Sterling had exploited and amplified. It was this very obedience, this blind devotion, that Hezekiah intended to exploit in return. He paid particular attention to Brutus's food. Sterling, in his boundless indulgence, ensured his dog ate better than most humans on the plantation. Prime cuts of meat, often reserved for the master's own table, were regularly given to Brutus. Hezekiah saw the dog devour these offerings with gusto, its powerful jaws tearing through the flesh without hesitation. He began to subtly alter the dog's diet, introducing small, almost imperceptible changes. With Martha's guidance, he acquired knowledge of local plants known for their medicinal properties and their less savory, more dangerous applications. Martha, whose hands knew every herb in the garden and every root in the nearby woods, provided him with specific knowledge of nightshade berries, foxglove, and certain types of poisonous mushrooms. She showed him how to carefully extract the toxins, how to measure them, how to mask their bitter taste with strong seasonings. "This foxglove," Martha whispered, her voice raspy as she showed Hezekiah a cluster of deep purple flowers. "It works on the heart, makes it beat too fast, then too slow, then stops it altogether. But you need just the right amount. Too little, and it does nothing. Too much, and it's obvious." She taught him how to prepare the poison, how to dry the leaves, how to grind them into a fine powder that could be mixed with meat without detection. Hezekiah worked in secret, often late at night in the stables, grinding and mixing, his hands steady despite the enormity of his task. He knew that a single mistake, a single oversight, could lead not only to his death, but to the deaths of all who were helping him. Master Sterling, meanwhile, continued his reign of terror, his cruelty escalating as his own health began to subtly decline. He found himself growing more tired, his breath coming shorter after any exertion, his temper fraying more easily. He attributed these symptoms to the heat or to the laziness of his slaves, never to his own excesses or the cumulative effect of his wickedness. He relied more and more on Brutus, not just for hunting, but for asserting his authority. He would parade the dog through the quarters, letting its presence, its low growl, serve as a constant threat. He used Brutus to intimidate, to punish, to remind everyone of his absolute power. Hezekiah saw Eliza's limp worsen with the changing weather, her pain a constant ache that mirrored his own internal torment. He saw the fear in the eyes of the younger slaves, particularly Samuel, his own son, who flinched every time Sterling or Brutus came near. The final catalyst for Hezekiah's plan came during a particularly brutal session of punishments. Sterling, in a fit of pique over a minor offense, ordered Brutus to attack a slave who had supposedly been slow in the fields. The man, already weak from hunger and exhaustion, was no match for the snarling dog. The sounds of the attack, the man's cries, Sterling's cruel laughter, all echoed through the plantation, a symphony of horror. Hezekiah, working nearby, felt a cold rage settle over him. He saw Brutus's eyes, alight with the frenzy Sterling had instilled, and a chilling thought took root. If Sterling could control the dog's savagery, perhaps Hezekiah could control the dog itself. He realized that Sterling's affection for Brutus was so profound, so irrational, that it was the one true vulnerability he possessed. To strike at Brutus, to destroy the thing Sterling cherished, would be to strike directly at the master's heart. That night the conspirators met again, their faces etched with the gravity of their decision. "Brutus is not well," Hezekiah reported, his voice low. "He's sluggish, his breathing is heavy. The final dose is ready." Martha nodded, handing him a small, tightly wrapped package. "This will ensure it. Mix it with his evening meal. No one will suspect a thing." Elias confirmed his part of the plan. During the time Hezekiah would be preparing Brutus's final meal, Elias would create a diversion. A minor disturbance, a spooked horse, a small fire in an outbuilding, something to draw the overseer's attention away from the stables. They agreed on the timing. As soon as Brutus was confirmed dead, Hezekiah would butcher the carcass, preparing it according to Martha's instructions, hiding it until Sterling called for a special meal. The days that followed were a nerve-wracking waiting game. Hezekiah continued his work in the stables, his hands steady, his mind sharp. He administered the final dose to Brutus, watching as the dog grew weaker, its movements slower, its once fierce bark reduced to a pained whine. Sterling, consumed by his own self-importance, noticed only that his prize dog was unwell, attributing it to the heat or perhaps the overzealousness of the stable hands. He continued to dote on Brutus, bringing it water, stroking its matted fur, unaware that his beloved companion was slowly being poisoned by the very man he oppressed. Hezekiah felt a grim satisfaction watching Sterling's misplaced affection, knowing that soon that affection would turn to horror. The night Brutus died, the air was thick with anticipation. Hezekiah found the dog lying listlessly in its kennel, its breathing shallow, its eyes clouded with pain. He knelt beside the dying animal, a strange mix of pity and grim purpose churning within him. "Rest now, beast," he whispered, stroking its forehead. "Your service is done." He stayed with Brutus until its breathing stopped. Then, with Elias's help, they quickly and discreetly disposed of the carcass, butchering it in a secluded clearing and preparing the meat under Martha's precise instructions. They worked through the night, their movements efficient, their silence absolute, the grim task fueled by a shared burning desire for retribution. The meat was seasoned heavily, marinated in dark wine and strong herbs, its true nature hidden beneath layers of flavor, waiting for its moment to be served. Master Sterling, meanwhile, found his own health beginning to falter. The constant stress, the heavy drinking, the lack of rest were taking their toll. He grew more irritable, his temper flaring at the slightest provocation. He complained of chest pains, of shortness of breath, but dismissed them as minor ailments, the price of power and leadership. He relied more and more on Brutus, finding solace in the dog's unquestioning obedience and physical presence. He would lean on the dog, speak to it as if it were a confidant, unaware that his trusted companion was slowly succumbing to a fate orchestrated by the very people he tormented. Hezekiah watched Sterling weaken, saw the shadow of his own mortality begin to creep into the master's eyes, and knew the time was drawing near. The plan so carefully laid was nearing its completion, and the stage was set for a reckoning that would be served hot, and with a terrible, unforgettable flavor. Master Sterling's decline was noticeable to all on the plantation, though few dared to speak of it openly. His once booming voice had become a strained rasp, his energy sapped by the relentless indulgence that had defined his life. He spent more and more time in his study, surrounded by the symbols of his wealth and power, his body betraying him with every labored breath. He often called for Hezekiah, not for his skills with horses, but simply for the slave's quiet presence, a silent witness to his growing infirmity. Hezekiah would sit by the master's chair, a picture of patient servitude, all the while observing the subtle signs of Sterling's failing health, the blue tinge of his lips, the tremor in his hands, the vacant stare that sometimes overtook his eyes. Each observation was a confirmation that his plan was moving forward, that Sterling's own excesses were weakening him, preparing him for the final, terrible meal. The death of Brutus had, predictably, thrown Sterling into a profound state of grief and rage. He blamed the stable hands, the overseers, the very air on the plantation for his dog's demise. He ordered stricter watch on the stables, harsher punishments for any perceived negligence. But Hezekiah, with Elias's help, had been thorough. The dog's body was disposed of in the swamp, its remains devoured by the murky waters and hungry creatures of the earth, leaving no trace of their grisly work. Hezekiah had prepared the dog's flesh with Martha's guidance, transforming it into a rich, dark meat, perfectly seasoned and tenderized, ready to be served as Sterling's favorite venison. The carefully crafted dish sat hidden in the cold storage, awaiting the opportune moment. That moment arrived sooner than Hezekiah expected. Sterling, weakened and increasingly paranoid, decided to host a dinner for a few select planters, men who held similar sway and shared similar cruelties. It was a chance for him to assert his authority, to remind them of his legacy, and perhaps to boast about his prized hunting dog, even in its absence. He summoned Hezekiah to his study. "Hezekiah!" Sterling rasped, his voice strained. "I'm having guests tomorrow night. I want a feast. Your finest venison. Prepare it yourself. Make it special. A tribute to Brutus, perhaps. He was a fine animal. Sterling's eyes, usually filled with malice, now held a flicker of something else. Sadness, perhaps, or a possessive pride in the dog he had lost. Hezekiah bowed his head, his heart pounding not with fear, but with the thrill of the approaching climax. "Yes, Master Sterling," he replied, his voice calm and steady. "I will make it special. A dish worthy of Brutus, and of you." He left the study with the master's words echoing in his mind, the words that confirmed his plan's final execution. The irony was almost too much to bear. Sterling wanted a tribute to his dog, and Hezekiah would provide it, in a way Sterling could never have imagined. The next day was a flurry of activity in the kitchen and stables. Martha oversaw the final preparations of the venison, ensuring every trace of its true origin was masked by the rich marinade and potent herbs. Hezekiah ensured the meat was cooked to perfection, tender and succulent, its aroma filling the kitchen with a tantalizing scent that belied its horrifying source. The dinner was set for sundown. The big house, usually a place of forced servitude, was aglow with candlelight, the dining hall set with Sterling's finest china and crystal. Sterling, dressed in his best attire, sat at the head of the table, his face pale but flushed with anticipation. His guests arrived, equally pompous and cruel, their conversation already focused on politics, profits, and the ownership of human lives. Hezekiah, dressed in his cleanest, albeit threadbare clothes, moved silently through the room, serving the meal with practiced efficiency. The conversation flowed, punctuated by Sterling's occasional coughs and heavy breaths. He seemed to be enjoying himself despite his evident frailty, the taste of wine and power seeming to invigorate him. Then came the main course. Hezekiah brought out the venison, roasted to a perfect golden brown, glistening under a rich dark sauce that Martha had prepared. He placed the platter before Master Sterling with a small respectful bow, his face impassive, betraying none of the immense weight of the moment. "Master Sterling," Hezekiah said, his voice low but clear, carrying across the hushed room, "your special dish, prepared to honor Brutus." Sterling looked at the meat, then at Hezekiah, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. He seemed to appreciate the slave's attention to detail, mistaking his quiet intensity for humble service. "Ah, yes," Sterling rasped, reaching for his carving knife. "For Brutus. A fitting tribute." He carved himself a generous portion, then offered some to his guests, who eagerly accepted. As they ate, Sterling closed his eyes in pleasure, savoring the rich flavor. "Hezekiah," he declared, his voice filled with satisfaction, "this is magnificent, the finest venison I have ever tasted. You have truly outdone yourself. This is precisely the kind of tribute Brutus deserved." He took another large bite, savoring the tender texture and the complex blend of spices. He seemed to forget his own physical ailments for a moment, lost in the pleasure of the meal. His guests echoed his praise, their own mouths full, their faces reflecting the same appreciation. Hezekiah watched them, his heart a cold, steady drum against his ribs. He saw Sterling gesture for more wine, saw him lean back in his chair, patting his stomach with a look of deep contentment. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. Now was the time for the reveal. Hezekiah stepped forward, his movement deliberate, his eyes fixed on Sterling. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. Sterling, annoyed by the interruption, frowned. "What is it now, Hezekiah? Have you come to ask for more wine?" Hezekiah didn't answer directly. Instead, he spoke slowly, deliberately, his voice carrying a chilling resonance that seemed to cut through the candlelight. "Master Sterling," he began, "you speak of Brutus. You say this meat is a fitting tribute to him." Sterling's brow furrowed. "Yes, Hezekiah, it is exceptional. But what is your point?" Hezekiah took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "My point, Master Sterling, is that you always said Brutus was more valuable than any slave. More loyal, more deserving of your finest attentions." He paused, letting his words sink in, watching the flicker of confusion in Sterling's eyes. "You cherished that dog, Master Sterling. You fed it the best. And now," Hezekiah continued, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper, "you have finally tasted its true worth." The words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. Sterling's face, already flushed from drink and exertion, began to drain of color. His eyes widened, darting from Hezekiah to his plate, his fork clattering to the floor. The realization dawned, slow and terrible, like a predator cornering its prey. He choked, his hands flying to his throat as if to expel the food, his body convulsing. His guests stared, paralyzed by horror, their own plates of venison suddenly transformed into instruments of dread. Sterling let out a strangled cry, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror, as the poison, meticulously prepared by Martha and delivered by Hezekiah, began its work, mirroring the death throes of the dog it came from. His body collapsed onto the floor, his magnificent feast now a horrifying testament to a revenge years in the making. The sound of Sterling's choking, gurgling death throes ripped through the opulent dining room, shattering the veneer of civility and plunging the plantation into chaos. His guests, a collection of men who shared his cruelty and avarice, scrambled back from the table, their faces masks of disbelief and horror, some retching openly. Sterling's body writhed on the floor, his eyes wide and unseeing, his last breath a ragged gasp that seemed to carry the weight of all the suffering he had inflicted. Hezekiah watched him go, his own body rigid, his heart heavy with a grim finality. Justice, in its most brutal and absolute form, had been served, but Sterling's death was not the end. It was the beginning. The sounds of Sterling's demise, the screams of his guests, acted as a signal. From the slave quarters, from the fields, from the kitchens where Martha and others waited, a low rumble began to grow, a sound that had been suppressed for generations, now unleashed with terrifying force. It was the sound of chains snapping, of pent-up rage exploding, of an entire people rising up against their oppressors. Elias, armed with a pitchfork from the stables, led a charge towards the big house, followed by men and women wielding hoes, axes, and the sheer force of their collective fury. The overseers, still groggy from drink and caught completely off guard, were quickly overwhelmed. The slaves moved with a unified purpose, their fear replaced by a burning, righteous anger. The big house, that symbol of Sterling's absolute power, became the focal point of the rebellion. In the study, where Sterling's ledgers documented the lives and value of hundreds of human beings, fire was set. The flames devoured the records, consuming the paper chains that had bound generations, turning inventories of human lives into ashes. Hezekiah, his task complete, joined the surge of people moving through the plantation, his presence a quiet force amidst the storm. He saw Eliza watching from the doorway of their cabin, her injured leg a testament to the past, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and fierce pride. He saw Samuel, safe for now, his young face wide with a mixture of fear and awe. The rebellion was short-lived, brutally suppressed by the local militia alerted by Sterling's terrified guests. The enslaved fought with the desperation of those who had nothing left to lose, but they were outmatched by trained soldiers with firearms. Many fell that night, their cries silenced by the crack of muskets. Hezekiah, Eliza, and Samuel managed to slip away in the ensuing chaos, melting into the dense Georgia woods, guided by Elias and others who knew the hidden paths and secret routes to freedom. They carried with them not possessions, but the memory of what they had done, the knowledge that for one night they had struck back. They had served a justice that transcended the laws of men. The legend of Hezekiah spread quickly, whispered from plantation to plantation, carried on the wind like a dark prophecy. The story of the slave who made his master eat his own dog became a symbol of the ultimate defiance, a chilling reminder that even the most oppressed could find ways to exact a terrible revenge. Sterling's death was officially recorded as a sudden, violent illness, perhaps brought on by his own excesses. The planters who had been at the dinner spoke of a terrifying uprising, of savage brutality, conveniently omitting the context of decades of Sterling's own inhumanity. But among the enslaved, the truth was known. Hezekiah had not just killed Sterling. He had broken him, consumed him, made him taste the very essence of his own cruelty. Hezekiah, Eliza, and Samuel found refuge in one of the clandestine settlements hidden deep within the Carolina swamps. Communities formed by escaped slaves who lived outside the reach of the law. Here, Hezekiah's quiet strength and strategic mind found new purpose. He became a leader, organizing defenses, teaching younger generations the skills they needed to survive and fight for their freedom. Eliza, her leg healing but the memory of Brutus's teeth never fading, became a healer, using her knowledge of herbs and remedies passed down from her mother. Samuel grew up in this hidden world, learning to read, to hunt, and to understand the history that had brought him there. He never forgot the meal his father had served, the terrible act of justice that had set them free, though he rarely spoke of it. The legend of Hezekiah grew in the telling. Some whispered that he had used witchcraft, that he had invoked ancient spirits to aid him. Others spoke of his incredible cunning, his ability to manipulate the master's own vices against him. But all agreed on one thing. Hezekiah had shown that even the most downtrodden could find a way to strike back, to make their oppressors understand the weight of their actions. His name became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, a single act of resistance, however terrible, could plant the seeds of change. The story was never written down in official histories, never spoken aloud in polite society, but it lived on in the hearts and minds of those who had felt the lash, who had seen their families torn apart, who knew that sometimes the only justice available was the justice one made for oneself. Years passed. The nation convulsed in civil war, and slavery was finally abolished. But the scars remained, etched not just on the land, but on the souls of the people. Hezekiah lived long enough to see his son Samuel grow into a free man, to witness the dawn of a new era, though he knew the fight for true equality was far from over. He never spoke of the events at Sterling Plantation in detail, but when he looked at Eliza, when he saw Samuel learning to read and write, he knew that the terrible meal he had served had been worth the risk, worth the price. It had bought them not just freedom, but a measure of justice, a way to balance the scales, however imperfectly. The memory of Brutus, the dog, and the man who loved it more than his own humanity was a constant reminder that the greatest punishments are often self-inflicted, delivered by the very vices that sustain them. The wind whistling through the Georgia pines is said to still carry the faint, bitter scent of that unforgettable meal, a testament to the courage and the terrible resolve of Hezekiah of Savannah. If this story planted something inside you, don't let it die here. Subscribe, leave your mark, and share it with those who carry in their hearts the memory of the ones who could not be silenced.